I look at some of the things that we've done. I can't say what we did or who did it, but it's pretty neat in the last couple of years to see cars win races, see championships be won, knowing that the things that we came up with and the technology we put into it is part of that.
That's awesome.
That's
All right. Well, welcome to the very first episode of the Spare Parts Show on Street Muscle Magazine. We're doing it live at PRI with Lake Speed, like the whole racer thing where what's preparation? Let's just get after it, right?
Oh, see, that's inoculate to me, right? Growing up the way I did in NASCAR, the mantra was that, you win races at the shop and you lose them at the racetrack. Preparation is actually everything. That's what separates the teams that win from the teams that lose, is preparation.
Oh, 100%. And that's, that was one of the things I want to talk with you about is I grew up in the drag racing world, grassroots drag racing, working with radial tire cars, and 110%. Preparation in the shop is what wins and loses the races. And maybe we'll get into a little bit first. Let's back things up a little bit.
Sure.
Your dad, to me, like the gladiator era NASCAR guys, open face helmets, goggles, like manly men.
No power steering.
No power steering, like, we die like real men kind of deal. Your dad raced all kinds of vehicles all over the place. You grew up in NASCAR. What was it like growing up in like that era and that kind of deal?
Obviously, while I was growing up, I didn't have any appreciation of it. I didn't know anything different. Some of my very first memories in life are at a racetrack because when I was born, my dad was still racing go-karts, traveling all across the country, running races, in WKA and things like that, building his career. So we were at a racetrack. That's what it was. We had to go to school and couldn't go to the racetrack. It sucked, because all my friends were at the racetrack, and the racetrack at school was where he lived. And so then he went into NASCAR, and the same thing. NASCAR is a lifestyle. It's not something that happens on the weekends. It's a life you live 365. The off season is getting a lot of work done. It is not going to the Bahamas.
No, not at all.
No, it's getting in the shop and cleaning everything up, working to the trailer, and working on new ideas. How do you make your cars better for next year? How do you get everything light, low, and left in NASCAR, right? Turn to left all the time, everything light, low, left. How do you do that? How do you make more horsepower? You're just working, iterating. And I think that's, where probably I got my passion for research and development came out of that racing mentality of that you're always trying to get better because your competitor isn't resting. I mean, what made Glidden and WJ so great is you had two epic competitors that would not rest, would not stop, because the other one knew the other one was working.
That's what makes the greats what they are. And that's kind of what, circle track racing and, like the whole theme of NASCAR and stuff like that kind of draws me in is you're killing ants with a thermonuclear device. You're going fast
right,
and turning left.
Right.
But the level...
Overkill is our life. That's our norm.
Like what goes into that is, unrelenting. And, to me, I kind of break drag racing up into, like I say, like different eras, like, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, yada, yada, yada. What was it like kind of during that time period, we'll say when things got really, really big for NASCAR? Back in those days when, again, the open face helmets, the guys were fighting it out. What was it like, going through a season with what needed to be done, the development, like what was that workflow like?
So in that era was really great was the fact that the teams were small. And so it was a very, very tight-knit bunch.
Yeah.
You were, at the shop at, 7 a.m. or earlier, and you didn't leave until 6 or 7 or later, depending upon what was going on, every night. And then you traveled together. You didn't have jets. you hopped in a van.
You hopped in the cab over.
Right, and you drove to the racetrack, and you were with each other all the time. I mean, honestly, you did spend more time with your teammates than you did your family, and that had to be something that you had to love it enough to do that. If you didn't love it enough to do that, you probably weren't going to make it very long in this thing. But that's what made it great, is that there was this passion for racing and a brotherhood, because you didn't want to be the guy that let everybody else down.
Yeah.
When you were the mechanic working on the car, the last thing you ever wanted to do is man, I left that lug nut loose, or I left this wrench in the wrong place, and it caused the car to crash, and I hurt my driver, and I hurt the team because I made a mistake. I didn't do the best that I could. So it was brotherhood, camaraderie, and the cool thing is that everyone involved, they did it because they wanted to do it. They had a passion for it, not because they were getting a big fat paycheck and they were Hollywood on TV.
Yeah.
There wasn't none of that.
That's like, you look back at that old stuff, and Doug Coletta just won NHRA Fuel Championship, which what's funny is a lot of people don't realize, which is terribly ironic, because I remember watching on Flow Racing Doug beating up on Tony Stewart to win a race and some championships. But that's a whole other rivalry for another time that we'll let the NHRA unpack next year's a storyline. But I was watching, you remember Nashville Network when they had Rio Racing. They had one of their episodes of Winners being hosted by Neil Bonnet, and he had the Coletta family on there. And it was like Connie, Scott, Doug, and one other dude running 2 fuel cars.
Yeah.
That's unheard of these days. Was that same thing like in NASCAR back in the day, where you would have just a couple tire changers, maybe an engine guy and the driver, and that was it?
They had a really small team. You could put, you get a Ford Econoline van, and your entire team could fit in that van. The whole team. That's all you had. You had one van, and the whole team hop in there, and you drive and do the thing. But that's what made it great, is that it was small. Everyone cared to do whatever it took to be successful. And what was neat about that era was that there was also a lot of freedom for innovation, right? That there weren't a lot of rules, so there was a lot of creativity. To me, I understand why NASCAR has the rules the way they do now. I get it, but I guess the way I grew up was that you could get an advantage by using your brain. You didn't have to use your checkbook.
Yeah.
In fact, the rules were so open that you could easily dial yourself out if you could outsmart yourself. And the guys who were really clever could come up with a new idea and a new innovation and hide it for a little while. Eventually things got out. But that innovation, figuring out what's next, another way to skin the cat, that's what made it fun. And the reality is that when you traveled around, you had Weekend Warrior guys that came for free, and you may have different Weekend Warriors in Michigan than you had at Talladega, because it was local guys that just happened to know, and they would show up and they would run gas or strip weather nut glue off the lug nuts at the racetrack, but I think that's the thing that era to me, it was about determination and creativity.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about that for a second, the innovation part. Is there anything that you remember, like, being a part of, like, an innovation, like an oh wow moment that no one else really had, that you guys got to, like, develop and bring out? Is there something that...
How much time do we have?
I mean, technically, I've heard them pick this out fast, but like a quick story, like something that's just like one of those cool old school wow moments.
From what era?
But let's talk the Gladiator era, kind of like when your dad was, we'll say, pre-1990.
Okay, pre-90, okay. All right, so my dad in the early 80s drove for Haas Ellington in the number 1 car. And Haas owned an HVA system, right? Heating and air company. And people who are familiar with engines know volumetric efficiency, right? If the more dense you can make the air going into the engine, the more powerful the engine's going to be. So they came up with a pretty cool way of, we'll call it creatively creating a cooler for the fuel inside a roll bar so that they could run colder fuel into the engine so that it was cooling the intake charge.
Yeah.
It was cool, right? And that was one that they did. And of course, they got caught, doing that. But
That could be a whole other show that we could do. Things that were in roll bars that should not have been there.
well,
You know what I mean?
That's one of the crumbs in this little trail is that my dad's crew chief back then was a guy named Sheldon Pittman. A lot of guys know him as Runt Pittman. So he was later the crew chief at Morgan McClure, the 4-car, when Ernie Irvin and Sterling Marlin and the X-Pipe car and all that stuff. Well, I'll just say Runt learned creative rules interpreting the right way early on, and if you don't think there were some creative rules interpreting going on in the 4-car days, you're wrong. Runt, that was one of his advantages, is that he could think way outside the box, and sometimes that meant thinking in places, well, they'll never go look for this here.
The rules interpretation to me means, well, it doesn't say I can't do this. And that's, when you write a rule book, you have to think like that, because otherwise you'll have people like us that go, well, you did say I can't do that.
It's only illegal if they find it.
That too. We did that at Power Auto Media, we did the 10K drag shootout, and when we were kind of coming up, 10 days, $10,000 to build these cars, and the producer brought, this is the rule set that I want. And I don't think he was ready for us to go through and basically pick it apart. Like I would cheat here, here, and here. We thought we were just like, oh, we got this. Oh no, there was some of those guys that figured out creative ways to, case in point, they wanted.
What doesn't he say?
Yeah, well, they wanted to make a brand new torque converter look used so they could claim a lower value out of their budget. So what did they do? They grabbed an old acetylene torch and took it to make it look all burned up. Oh man, I only bought this thing for $200 off Facebook, and it's a brand new $1,200 converter. You know what? Guess what we learned? You look that stuff over. You look at the converter. Does it have a serial number? Who made this? You call the manufacturer and ask them, hey, when did you make this converter?
Yeah.
No.
To me, that's part of racing.
Yeah, totally.
You have to find every advantage. To me, if everything's the same, it's boring.
Yeah, you have to be the one.
And that's probably just, again, the result of when I grew up, the era that I grew up in, that we were with the people that were very competitive. They wanted to win, and it was, I wouldn't say win at all costs, because they didn't race dirty. They didn't, but if you could find a way to get an advantage, that's what you did.
Yeah, totally. That's within that unwritten racer conduct. You know what I mean?
Everybody respected each other for that. There was no oh, you're cheating, you're no good. It's like, no, it was like, we're trying to win, and if I come up with an idea, I see a loophole in the rule book, and I come up with a way to gain an advantage from that, that's good on you.
Out of some of the old school teams, is there anybody that you could use as an example in particular that was really, really good at finding those creative
Runt.
Was he the dude?
I swear, he was the master, man. Because Haas and those guys had no money. So in '83, I think it was, Dad either finished in the top 10 or they blew up every race, because they were running on used parts. Okay. They didn't have enough money to go buy everything brand new. So those guys found a way to push the limits on everything they had, and either they ran top 10 or they blew up.
Checkers or wreckers.
It was, but that was also an era too. Like I said, back to what it took to be a driver in that era was engines blew up pretty regularly. I remember the story when Joey Logano was driving for Gibbs. So we're going to jump, here to about 10, 15 years ago. Joey's driving for Gibbs, and we're Toyota, and there's Arizona Proving Grounds. They got this big giant oval, and you can go up there and basically run wide open, and they're doing durability testing. It's pretty boring for the driver, because they're just sitting there holding the thing wide open, and you're basically holding the steering wheel straight. So he's taking videos and pictures with his phone while he's driving and texting it to the crew about, hey, there's this coyote over there and this and that. You know, and I was telling Dad about that. He said, obviously, he's never driven in a series where engines blow up regularly.
Yeah.
He said, "There's no way I would ever do that."
Yeah, you got to be Chet talks about this when he's talking about the USEC. You got to be elbows up, like a dirt car. You got to be elbows up, ready to go.
Right, you're looking at something, but again, it's just I think there's not we'll call it a good era or a bad era of racing. All racing's fun, it's good, it makes us all better. But the reality is, the context of where you grew up and get your orientation changes, right?
Yeah.
It becomes part of who you are.
It's funny I've talked to some of the drag racers that I say that have spanned eras, like, the guys that have been around when it was, back in we'll say the 60s, some of the 70s, 80s, and like even some of the 90s, like Big Daddy Don Garland. I was talking to him about that. It's always interesting to get his take on the arc and trajectory of technology. What was that when you saw NASCAR, like how that kind of...
That's great question. So I'm going to go to the quote from Mark Cronkis, who's the head engine guy at Joe Gibbs Racing. He said, there are really 3 types of engine builders.
Okay.
There are people who are engine tinkerers, right? They're really good at taking an existing engine and crafting and creating new little things, massaging them, right? Probably Smokey Unick's probably one of the most famous tinkerers, right? But he didn't ever really, we'll call that an engine developer, right? Somebody that's taking an existing engine and then you're going to develop it and you're going to come up with this different thing than that. That's a completely different person than an engine designer. The guy that was the Harry Millers of the world, where it's blank sheet of paper.
Here you go.
And now I'm going to figure out a way to design something from scratch that does X, right? So I think, and then there's, again, back to just the regular engine assembler, the guy that is just a craftsman that's detail-oriented, that knows how, okay, I'm going to machine this part this way, I'm going to have this amount of fitment, all the little details, right? You really, not one is better than the other, but I think in a certain era where there were a lot of parts availability and there wasn't a lot of machining availability, you had people who were engine assemblers. They were craftsmen at building the engine. Then you got into, as things progressed up, now it's really about engine developers. I mean, Grumpy and those guys. I mean, those were the great engine developers. Now we're in this modern era where the names, you don't really know them because they're the guys who are behind the scenes. That are the guys, Paul Omar, Paul Morgan and Mario Illen from Ilmore, right? The guys who founded that. Those guys are engine designers. The Indy engine they built for Mercedes, that wasn't something that was a masterpiece of assembly, although it probably was, and it wasn't something they took and developed. They designed that from scratch, and it went out there and got outlawed after one race.
That's awesome. You've done something right when they outlaw you after one race.
It's like I said, who is the best? Who has the most rules written after you?
Yeah. You learn that.
That's who's the best.
You learn that lesson. We talked about this. The drag racing. We'll never shake too much of a tail feather because that's how you win lead trophies.
So my dad, his opinion is the greatest NASCAR driver ever was David Pearson.
Okay.
The reason for that is that when Dad was driving for Bud Moore, he said, that there were a couple of years that they had probably a 30 horsepower advantage on the whole field, but they did not win every race because Pearson knew that if they went out there and stunk up the show every race, man, all those tech inspectors would be all over them like white on rice. They'd be looking at everything, and something would go against them. So what he did was he would cruise around most of the race, and they'd pack, find a comfortable place, cruise. Toward the end of the race, he'd come up a little bit, and if it was a race that paid good money, he'd win it. But the ones that didn't pay so good, he'd get some good points out of it, make sure he was okay, but he maintained his advantage. He would not show all of his cars. It's easy if you have the fastest car to go out there and want to lead every lap and win every race.
But you're going to get the attention. The tech guy's going to come over and start asking questions.
That's driving, not racing. People that know it, there's a difference.
Yes.
There are people who are great drivers. Other people who are great racers.
Yes.
Dale Earnhardt was a great racer. Tony Stewart is a great racer. Not saying they can't drive, because obviously they can, but they can do more than turn the wheel and push the pedals.
They play what we'll call big brain chess.
Absolutely.
They understand this is what I need to do now, but I need to make sure that I'm not going to back myself into a corner over here.
There's a lot of guys who are fast.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of guys who are champions.
Yeah,
And it's not luck, they're champions.
No, you have to. Most championship seasons, I think, in any form of racing, you've got to have the right amount of luck and skill. Like, that's just what it comes down to. And, money definitely helps, but there's been plenty of times where there's been low-budget teams that win. But again, it's back when we talk about good racers.
Yep.
Or you get someone that's a good driver that gets helped to be a good racer by a good, crew chief or manager.
Absolutely.
And you got to work with one of the best, with Chad Canals. What was that like?
Chad was awesome. He's one of those guys back to being someone that's an innovator, that's willing to push the edge. There's no doubt about it. The reason why Jimmy Johnson's a 7-time champion is because Chad Canals was his crew chief.
What's it like working with someone that is that level of brilliant? Because some of us, we get fleeting moments when we get to rub elbows with brilliance, but you don't get to spend time in the locker room with them. What's that like?
I'll say this. I don't like the word brilliant, right? When we start applying it to people, right? We should always keep to that. Where I say that is, I feel like it implies that someone has this level of knowledge.
Okay.
Right? But we should always be gaining more knowledge. You should never stop learning.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
Right? What sets apart the Chad Canals from other guys is a relentless determination to improve.
So it's the whole mindset of, yeah, we just did really good, but what can we do better?
Right. Literally, I remember this. We went to Daytona in 2001 for the 500. This is, Dodge coming back. We went out there. We had a really great car. We worked super hard over the winter. One of the things that I learned from Chad is that you don't gain a second of lap time with one change, with one thing. Usually, it's going to take a tenth here, 2 tenths here, half a tenth there, and you add these 14 things together to get to that second. So you have to take the time and put in the effort to execute all of those things very well. So we had this car. It was amazingly fast, qualified outside pole. Right? You could say, well, there were some circumstances, right? In that case, of we're not really sure that NASCAR would hand you your springs and stuff. And just plate. And it's like, okay, well, did the car that won the pole, was that the one that wanted to win the pole?
Yeah.
Right? It's always been a question.
Yeah.
Right? I'll call it out. I don't care. But that wasn't good enough. We came back. We worked harder on the car, made changes to the car, and then we went to Talladega and won the pole. Flat out. Because going from a team that had been barely qualifying to finishing qualifying second, well, that's a huge game. You should be super happy.
But
no.
Yeah.
It's not good enough. But that's why, and that's no different than what we learned from working at Coach Gibbs. In the NFL, it's a competitive business. You get paid based on wins and losses. In racing, it's about winning races, winning championships. And as long as you understand that's the game, then you can play it. And it's not personal. Don't be emotional about it. This is what we're here for. You gotta do it. Get the job done. And getting the job done sometimes means working all weekend to build a brand new car, because that's what it takes.
It's interesting. just said that because I've been following a lot of dirt track racing this past year. I love dirt late models, super late models. If I had lottery money, I would absolutely have one so I could tear it up every weekend and pay someone to fix it. And watching those late model guys and hearing those interviews on what they do, they're constantly tinkering. And there was a couple times this year, someone like Jonathan Davenport was like, car wasn't doing what we did. We literally stripped it down to a bare chassis and rebuilt the car.
Yeah.
That's mind blowing. Is that what it like? That level of wanting to be a champion, like what you saw with Chad. It's just like this is what we're gonna do, and there's no questioning it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is. And I think another modern equivalent, I mean, definitely the dirt racing stuff is that. But I look at what's happening with like Sick Week. Tom Bailey and those guys and Steve Morris, what they're doing out there with the drag and drive deal. I don't need to do this, Brian, because I will become addicted. I look at it, it's like, I can't do that.
You know.
I know. I just can't go there. Because once you go there, you're never coming back.
That's funny you mentioned that because I had Tom on the Dragzine podcast at one point, and we were talking about, when he was at PRI one year, and he was trying to figure something out with the car, and I think he went to Peterson, and he explained what we was doing, and Peterson was like, wait, you did what with one of our dry sump systems? It's not designed to do that.
Right.
That's like that mindset of you get addicted for the innovation that you have that mindset where it's like you want to build the ultimate mousetrap. Honestly, you can't build what for drag and drive. You would chase your tail for decades.
No. The fact, I remember when they had Drag Week when it came through Charlotte, and he had the blue Nova, right? I think it was.
Yeah.
And he ran faster than pro stock cars did there, and then drove the car to Bristol. I'm like, that's amazing.
Your mind melts when you see stuff like that.
I'm like, that is amazing. That car just ran in the sixes, and then just drove 200 miles to Bristol, Tennessee, in a rainstorm. And there's not a team of 15 people to do that.
Two dudes in a car.
Two dudes in a car making it happen. God, I love that.
You remember what Johnny Lindbergh and Richie Compton did with that Nova, right? With the screw blower?
Mm-mm.
So basically, Compton and Johnny got together. They had the car. Compton had the car. Johnny had the engine. This is like a full-blown top alcohol funny car engine with the screw on.
Yeah.
Not something you would drive on the street. Like you could drive the track, but not on the street. So they legit, after a few beers, don't know how many, figured this out, that they would take the burst panel off of the blower, put a Holley throttle body over that, and use that to drive it on the street rather than, like, the blower's just there to, like, suck the air in it. No belt, like, it's turned into an extension of the intake. And then they would drive it from event to event like that.
Wow.
Like,
See, that is cool.
who thinks, like, or they take the, like, Tom would take the blower off his
That's
car.
how you know you're a racer.
Yeah. Oh, you see these guys on the drag and drive stuff, they do things where, from our point of view, you're like, that's terrifying, but I love it. You figured out how to do it,
That's the best. To me, that's the innovation, creativity. That's the part of racing that's the best. At that point, what makes it, the competition is what makes it not sculpture.
Yeah.
You can do all these things, and it's art. But what we do, what makes racing unique, is you're taking that artistic creativity, craftsmanship, and then we're mixing it with the competition. That's the alchemy that makes racing wonderful. That's why we're all here. Why is this place packed? Because of that.
It's a bunch of us that get a rule book for whatever kind of racing we go and be like, I need to beat everybody. How am I going to do it? And you start figuring it out. I'll tell you what's wild, over here to our right, you can't see it on the show, but there's an outlaw sprint car.
Yep.
And you listen to those guys talk, and if you've ever tried, like, we'll say the general public, you're on your iRacing deal, you're trying to drive a sprint car, and it's really hard. Now imagine doing that in real life, and you're fighting this car, and you're trying to, like, basically watch what your competition is doing, analyze what line they're doing, and you're adjusting the wing on that damn car, trying to go faster, like in real life in real time. to me, I would flip that car numerous times. To these guys, it's like getting a glass of water. It melts my brain that they can think like that.
I have the utmost respect for sprint car runners.
Yeah, any open wheel guy.
Oh yeah, I mean, wing sprint cars, non-wing sprint cars. It's insane what they can do, what they do. That's another thing. I can't go there.
Oh, yeah.
That would be like taking the needle, sticking it right in the vein. I'm done.
There is a particular group of individuals that I was part of the conversation with that are drag racers, won't release their names. They had the opportunity to go do some dirt track stuff. Mm-hmm. And afterwards, they said that is the worst possible thing I could have ever done because now I want to go get a late one. They're like 100%. And for me, I can understand that because during SEMA, I got to do the NASCAR driving experience thanks to my friends at the college. Shout out to Chris that said, hey, you want to come drive a NASCAR? I'm like, well, does the Pope wear a funny hat? Hell yeah, sign me up. Built into this car, first time on it, like going fast and turning left. I am not going to lie, it was borderline terrifying coming down that front straightaway thinking, is this thing going to stick? And you get to the point where you're like, well, you know what, it is what it is, and then it sticks. And then they're like, well, now you can go faster and faster. And all of a sudden I'm doing 150 in a NASCAR going around the track. And I've done 150 in my drag car, but 150 going in a circle.
Feels different, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm like, this is a problem because guess what? Now I need to go fast and turn left. That's a problem. I'm assuming you've probably ripped off a few laps, right?
A couple.
Yeah. What did you ever think, man, I want to be a baller, shot caller, be the guy in the car all times, or was it just I want to just do the tinker and deal?
It's funny, because my dad being so good, right, being world karting champion, I start off in go-karts. That bar is pretty high.
Yeah.
Right, and I love Dale Earnhardt Jr. because he had the guts to walk in his dad's shoes.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That takes a huge amount of being confident in who you are, being okay to be different and be judged that way, because he was, right?
Yeah.
Loved and judged, but to go do what he wanted to go do, right? To have that passion to go do it. Respect that completely. For me, it was, I liked driving, still race some and enjoy it, but my love was on the building the cars.
Yeah.
That's what part to me was the most interesting, was that I love the guys, the Waddell Wilsons of the world, and the Robert Yates and those kind of guys. That's who I was more interested in.
There's guys out there, like I know a couple of chassis builders that they built some wicked cars, went out and turned some out, raced fast, and they said, you know what, I like building them and tuning them more than I do racing them. So they build cars and put other people in them. They're like, I could go out and do it, but it's just like, it's not the love of what I want to do.
When we first started, me and my dad started going racing again together about 10, 15 years ago, and we go do these vintage races, and we would show up, and he would be trying to kill himself to do all the work in the car, so I could go make more laps in the car. And I'm like, no. You go drive your car. Let me work on mine.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I want you to get time. No, you go make laps. You go have fun. This is what's fun to me.
Yeah. It's the reason why I want to be here.
Yeah. I will work myself to the bone and kill myself. I'll work on your stuff. I'll work on my stuff. I want to tinker with it.
It's the mousetrap mentality, right?
Well, I say that, right? And there's a caveat, like any true racer. You say that when the helmet's not on. The moment you pull that helmet on, that changes.
Yes.
And it's over. Then it's about competition, and you got to go, and it's different. So, but that to me it would be boring to me to show up to drive. It would feel wrong.
Yeah.
I feel like a ship out of water, fish out of water, going to a racetrack and just hop in something and go drive and not be able to do something. Like wash the windshield or something,
Well, our time here is coming to an end. I appreciate you being my crash test dummy on this first episode. We'll see what it does. I always have to give my guests the opportunity to do their shout-outs. Thank you they need to thank and let the world know what's going on. So, what do you got going on? What do you need to plug?
Well, obviously Total Steel Piston Rings and Matt Hartford, all the guys there, gave me an opportunity 4 years ago to make that move from being at Driven Racing, Oil Joe Gibbs Racing for all the years doing oil to move over to piston rings. And so I'm a tribology nerd, and I love friction, wear, lubrication. Back to it's all about innovation, creativity. How do you get better? How do you make something more efficient? And being able to work at Total Seal has been fantastic to be able to. The number one source of friction in an engine's piston rings. Rubbing salt, number one source. So the easiest way to make your engine more powerful and more efficient is by changing the piston rings, changing the hone. We have a great opportunity, and we do a lot of work with Rottler Manufacturing to basically take honing ring seal technology to the next level. And we've really done a lot of cool things. Back to one of my favorite moments. At least, okay, I can look back and say Runt did some really awesome things in the '80s, and other things we did with Chad and at Melling coming along as a small team coming up. But I look at some of the things that we've done, and I can't say what we did or who did it, but it's pretty neat in the last couple of years to see cars win races, see championships be won, knowing that the things that we came up with and the technology we put into it is part of that.
That's awesome.
That's as good as it gets right there.
That's awesome. Well, man, thank you so much for being the guest, and thank you for tuning in. And we'll see you next time on the Spare Part Show presented by Street Muscle Magazine.